Poland is finally standing up to Russian bullying in the skies over NATO. But is the rest of NATO still waffling on whether or not to confront Russia? Plus, what is the Russian reaction to all of this? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's talk about it. You've seen me break down combat footage from Ukraine, analyze frontline tactics, and show what real war looks like. The last few years have shown everyone that chaos can erupt anytime, anywhere. So it's always good to prepare for even the worst. The same goes for your finances. The costs of war, inflation, and economic instability are hitting harder than ever. That's why I want to tell you about American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping you protect what you've earned with something solid, tangible, physical gold and silver. Whether you want it delivered straight to your door or stored in a tax-advantaged gold IRA account, they make it easy and secure. American Hartford Gold has an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau and thousands of 5-star reviews. The team knows what they're doing and they'll guide you every step of the way. And right now, if you let them know I sent you, you could get up to $15,000 in free silver. Call 866-449-5757 or text COMBAT to 65532 or just click the link in the description. So Poland and the UK are vowing to confront Russian aircraft violating NATO airspace. Now, here is what I thought was interesting, is that the phrasing between the two sides, or between the UK and Poland, is very different. Here's the quote from the Polish foreign minister. He says, quote, "If another missile or aircraft enters our airspace without permission, deliberately or by mistake, and gets shot down and the wreckage falls on NATO territory, please don't come here to whine about it." Now, this is from Poland's foreign minister at an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council in New York that was called on Monday to discuss a Russian airspace violation over Estonia. But literally, as that meeting was taking place, well, Denmark and Norway reportedly had to close their airports as more drones, large drones of unknown origin, swarmed some of their key airports. And in fact, there were 2 foreign nationals arrested for flying the drones within a prohibited zone. Interesting. And what I thought was more interesting is that actually the Danish government said, quote, "I cannot rule out that it is Russia. We have seen drones over Poland that should not have been there. We have seen activity in Romania. We have seen violations of Estonian airspace." This is according to Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen. Therefore, he says, "I can only say, in my view, that this is a serious attack on critical Danish infrastructure." Of course, the Kremlin said that suggestions of Russian involvement are unfounded, which is not the same thing as a denial, right? But the Danes say that this was done by what they called, quote, "a capable operator, an actor with the capabilities and will and tools to do this," which is usually a wink wink to say this isn't an amateur operation. This was some kind of professional. And well, there's not actually that many countries who have both a reason to fly military grade drones over NATO countries and have the means to do so. And in fact, in that Venn diagram, it's basically just Russia. Now, Norway is also mentioned. For example, in this past spring and summer, Russia has violated Norwegian airspace on 3 occasions, including Russian fighter jets on Norway's side of their shared border. And so, again, this is part of a pattern of behavior by Russia, but it is, again, escalating tremendously when you're not talking about Russian aircraft flying into waters that technically are Norwegian airspace. When we're talking about flights over the capital, when we're talking about drones sitting over critical airports, we're talking about a real level of threat here that is being posed by Russia. And again, Poland is saying, this is Donald Tusk, the Polish prime minister. He said, quote, "I want to be very clear. We will make a decision to shoot down flying objects without discussion when they violate our territory and fly over Poland. There is no room for debate here." And what I thought was also kind of interesting is that we don't see the same kind of strident actions from, for example, the United States. The United States says the U.S. and our allies will defend every inch of NATO territory. Russia must urgently stop such dangerous behavior. That's according to U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Mike Walls, trying to reassure NATO allies. But you might remember, Mike Walls was the former national security advisor who got the boot from the Trump administration, so he's not exactly speaking on their behalf. He added, either Moscow wants to escalate and pull more countries into this conflict with Ukraine, which it already has, or it doesn't have full control over those who operate its fighter planes and drones. Either scenario is very disconcerting, which is just comical, right? You like really, you're giving them this out. You're being like, well, maybe Russia doesn't actually know where its fighters are going, which is kind of a fucking joke, right? And you'd think that Russia itself would at least try to be like, hey, sorry, or to, again, take the bait, so to speak, of that they're being handed by the US to say, listen, just say, hey, this was a commander who was confused when they gave orders to the fighter jets. They were supposed to do a flyover, but they didn't. These drones, they were, they were they were operating, it was a software error or something, or they were jammed by the Ukrainians. But the Russians aren't doing that. Instead, they're simply saying, well, this didn't happen. The Russian jets did not veer off the agreed upon route, nor did they cross into Estonian airspace, which is a blatant lie. As they point out, the Estonians actually brought their radar. They said, listen, he showed, here is the close-up photographs of the Russian jets showing, hey, they were carrying missiles and were combat ready. The violation is crystal clear. Russia is lying again and has lied several times before. Right? Peskov said, quote, we have never heard Estonian statements that they have objective monitoring data to back up their claim. That's why we consider such words to be empty, unfounded, and a continuation of a completely reckless pattern of escalating tensions and provoking a confrontational atmosphere. Which is, again, preposterous that multiple radars detected these MiG-31s. And at some point, like what Russia is doing is seeing if NATO is all talk or not. And the answer appears to be, for most NATO countries, yeah, they're all talk. They aren't actually willing to confront ever for any reason. And what Vladimir Putin is learning, what he's trying to tease out, is not that he wants to invade NATO, is that he wants to know, like, does NATO have the spine to stand up to him without the US's backing, which, as we've discussed, the US wants to give Russia an out all of the time, or Trump, who is basically functioning as the entire US government at this point, given that no one else in the administration gets to have any input. They only get to repeat what Trump tells them to. And the fact is that without the United States, it's other than Poland, who may actually shoot down a Russian jet. As we point out, Turkey shot down a Russian jet 2 years ago, and the Russians just sort of stopped flying jets over Turkey. But the fact that the Europeans are unwilling to take even this basic step of defending their sovereignty sends a signal to Putin to say, listen, there's a lot of other things that you can do that NATO's not going to be willing to confront you on. Because if you're Estonia, or you're Romania, or you're Poland, and literally armed Russian combat jets fly on an attack pattern into your territory, and you issue them strongly worded statements at the UN and take no other actions, Russia's going to go, listen, they're definitely going to say fuck all if we roll our tanks into Moldova, if we subvert the Moldovan elections. They're going to do fuck all if we start committing war crimes, more war crimes, right? To Russia, their takeaway is they're trying to see if there is a confrontation that NATO feels it's strong enough to even have with Russia, literally on its own home turf. And there's also there's layers to this. There's also a kind of humiliation aspect to prove to the Estonian people, hey, listen, Russia is so powerful, we can do anything we want. And that includes flying jets right over your country. They're saying, listen, we're proving to the Danes, listen, I don't care how big you think your economy is. You guys just let us fly drones right over your airport. All of these things, we decide if your airport is open or not. We decide if your airspace is clear or not. And that message is meant for the publics of these countries, to frame their governments as weak, to frame them as impotent, and to frame Russia as strong and someone who you should probably try to make a deal with, right? To say to them, listen, your support for Ukraine has meant that armed Russian jets are now in your skies. And the Europeans, again, their unwillingness to say, no, we defend our skies, rather the unwillingness not just to say it, they say those things all the time, but to take the actions. And that's sort of the problem, is that when you have someone like Mike Walls say, we defend every inch of NATO, well, then why is the U.S. withdrawing aid from the Baltic states, right? You would think this event would make the Trump administration reverse course to say, no, we're going to improve the military readiness. We're going to forward deploy American troops into the Baltics to really show, to signal in a meaningful way that, hey, if you try something, we're going to put a stop to it really, really quick. But the fact that none of those things are happening says that to Russia, the U.S. is in retreat, NATO is scared and impotent, and Russia can continue to do these things and only face strongly worded condemnations from the UN.